Four, three, two, one. And we're here again, Laith.
Hi, Namir.
This is one that I've been really looking forward to. I can't wait to do the
super
introduction.
Excited.
I know. You know how excited
I know
I've been.
you are.
I've been telling everyone about this, to be honest, because I think it's such an important topic, especially in today's times. And we'll jump into it. But before I do my introduction of our amazing guest who's given us some time, I wanted to start with a quote that I read from his book. And I think it's extremely powerful, which is, hope doesn't change what we believe. What we believe changes how we hope, right? And it just kind of, I don't know, just rang in my brain in so many different ways. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Dan Tomasulo. He's part of the core faculty for the Spirituality Mind Body Institute at Teachers College, Columbia University. Holds a PhD in psychology, MFA in writing. I'm going to go on for a while because he's done so many amazing things. He's created interactive behavioral therapy, which is the most widely used form of group therapy for intellectual and psychiatric disabilities. Beyond that, and why he's here is he's an author of multiple books, including his award-winning Confessions of a Former Child, a Therapist's Memoir, and what I'm really interested in, which I read prior to reading his recent book, is The American Snake Pit, which chronicles his experience deinstitutionalizing the residents of Willowbrook out in New York, which was just an insane institution, a horror story, to be honest. But we're going to get started with his most recent book, which was just launched, Learned Hopefulness, The Power of Positivity to Overcome Depression. Thank you very much for joining us, sir.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. What a pleasure it is to be here. Thank you.
To be honest, I just kind of want to jump right into it. And I think what a lot of people are experiencing. Yeah. I think what a lot of people are experiencing, especially in this time, is they are experiencing the lack of connections with people, and they're feeling that depression coming over them. Some have been able to find outlets, positive outlets, but I think a large majority of the population has really been struggling. And I think that's why the message of your book is so powerful. And I was really excited to have you on. So,
well, thanks. I think that this is maybe the most critical time for the world in so many different ways, because we're getting ready now to enter a phase of life that no other species at any other time has ever come in contact with. We're conscious, we're alive, and the whole world is involved. And so I think the tools of the past can help us a little bit, but we really need a new set of tools moving forward. And I think that's where hope comes in the idea of learned hopefulness. Hope is the only positive emotion, the only one that requires negativity or uncertainty to be activated. And that makes it unique because negativity, uncertainty, well, we certainly have those raw elements now. And I think that's the important thing, that we learn how to cultivate our hopefulness from these raw dimensions.
Yeah, it's just that what was really intriguing to me, and me and Laith, we always, recently actually we've had a couple of quite positive people kind of talking about subjects that are really important. We just had our friend Elizabeth Boulder who joined us, and she spoke about breathing and how important breathing is to your health. But a part of that discussion, and it kind of connected so well with you and the message that you're putting across, which was, it's not just one pillar that is going to bring you happiness and health and well-being, right? It's the ability to try to capture all those elements, the physical and the inner person as well, right? And what was so amazing about your book, and why I really enjoyed it, is that you kind of put the power in the person's hand.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point about, there's so much science out there, and positive psychology has experienced such an explosion in terms of research. The dilemma is that when you see so much of this coming at you, this is good for you, that's good for you, it becomes a little bit overwhelming. And I really wanted to have a book that was practical, functional, that once people read it, they wouldn't just be filled with good ideas. They would have really practical things that would help transform them. Because that's what the book is about, transforming negativity and uncertainty into something that engages you. And that does require a way of thinking about hope that is really different than the way we've thought about things like depression and anxiety. Most of psychology has been focused on alleviating symptoms and suffering. And believe me, there's nothing wrong with that. The problem is not being depressed isn't the same as being happy. So all the tools that would release us from our depression don't necessarily make us happy. And that's why about 80% of people with depression relapse. So we can get people out of a hole, people can get themselves out of a hole, but they don't have the tools to stay out. So we started to study the 20% that do really well, more than resilience. They're not just bouncing back, they're bouncing forward. What are they doing that's different? And that is invigorating. That's really exciting to me. One of the things I did is I took a look at all the different research on hope. It took about a year or so to read as much as I could. What I realized is that the hope researchers really didn't know about the other researchers doing hope. Everybody was in their own silo. So for the most part, you had the medical people doing incredible research on hope that the social psychologists didn't know, that the clinical psychologists didn't read. And then you take a look at the people who were taking a look at community-based hope. And they weren't reading the other theories. So it's like the three blind men holding the elephant, right? The one holds a tail and says the elephant looks like a snake. The other one holds a leg and says it looks like a tree. And the other one holds an ear and says it looks like a bird. And I asked the different question. What if everybody's right? What if they all have a piece of the elephant? What would hope look like? And that's what Learned Hopefulness became.
So just a question on your journey in writing this book. And I think it can also kind of give a little bit more background for me to get to know you as well, and for the audience to get to know you well. Is how did this all come about? Was it a year ago you took a decision to say, okay, I want to look into this hope? Or is this, a life's worth of work that's kind of come in a perfect storm together to create this book? So if you can,
it's very interesting. On a recent interview, somebody said, "How long did it take you to write this book?" And I said, "All my life." So I think part of it is just being able to integrate things. But there are three big elements that I think sort of are in essence turning points leading to this. The first is that about 10 years ago or so, I went through a really major difficulty in my life. And I was already a psychologist. I was already a writer. I was already doing these things. But I got depressed. And I was surprised, actually, because I'm not a depressive type. And I was surprised that whatever was going on in my life was that it was formidable, but it wasn't something that I thought would knock me out. And what I realized after months and months and months and months is that I wasn't getting better. And there's nothing worse than a depressed psychologist. I can tell you that. People would come in trying to talk about their depression, and I would go, you think you got it bad. Let me tell you what's going on for me. I didn't actually say but
we get the message.
Right? But that started me thinking about, oh God, what am I going to do? Should I take medicine? Should I do this? Should I do that? And I was already doing all the basics, things like, exercising more, making sure I wasn't drinking, alcohol is a depressant. So if you're depressed, that's like,
the worst thing.
It amplifies
bad,
it.
So just trying to curb the things that I thought would make it worse and do the things I thought would make it better. But honestly, none of it really pulled me out. And a friend of mine at the time was becoming a positive psychologist, and he was, it was like he's my best friend in the whole world, and telling me to, cheer up. And I was like, oh God, you say that one more time, I'm going to really
Snap out of it. Snap out of it.
Yeah, and he said, let's go to the conference where Martin Seligman at UPenn was doing his research. I said, no, I'd like to remain miserable, thank you. And he didn't pay attention, got us tickets to the conference. And that was a real changing point, because as a researcher and clinician, I said, if these guys are even remotely close to what they're showing here, this is going to blow people away. And I literally just started doing the things that I was learning from the conference. And in about a month, my long-standing feeling of being stuck and depressed lifted. And I was not doing something radical. I was really just taking a few minutes each day to think about things like gratitude and kindness. It sounded like a pea shooter going up against a tank. But that was a real turning point, to know that I could feel that miserable, and that there was something I could do to change my mind. So that was the first part of it. There's a little more to the story, but I figured I'd just tell you that part for right now.
Well, look, we'd love to hear. We have time to kind of go through it and kind of get that experience. But just thinking about you mentioning the conference, you also have the Master of Applied Positive Psychology. Was that what the conference was for?
Well, that's a part, the second part of this. So I came away from that conference feeling empowered and buoyed, because the research, the evidence-based stuff was like, wow, this is really good. This is really important and powerful. And it's working. I could feel that it transitioned. It helped me. And then, we decided why don't we just go see what the course is about. So I already had, several graduate degrees, including a PhD and an MFA and stuff. And I didn't really need the degree, but I really wanted the knowledge. So I thought what I would do is just apply to the program. And I really didn't give it much thought beyond that. I figured, well, I'll know what books to read or papers to read. Mm-hmm. But when I got there, Marty Seligman, who probably the best known psychologist alive today, I come to find out that he hadn't let psychologists into the program. And he said, well, most psychologists are doing research. I said, well, why'd you let me in? He said, well, you're not a normal psychologist. I'm still not sure what he meant by that. But I think because I was already trained as a writer, and I had experience in psychodrama, that he saw my combination of skills as different. And maybe helpful. He was working with business people, coaches, yoga teachers, a lot of folks from very different areas, education folks and whatever. And so I felt I was in a very cool spot, because now this was applied positive psychology. I'm a psychologist, but I could also find new ways to apply it. And I will tell you, it made my PhD look like a walk in the park. It is an extremely intense program.
Wow.
And it just kind of awakened me to a whole new field. So it's about a year long. And the day I graduated, Marty invited me to join the faculty as his assistant. So I did that. And then that was really now getting exposed to this year after year. That was about 10 years ago. So now I've been exposed to all the new research, staying on top of it. Yeah. And the third phase of this is that about 3 years ago, Marty invited about 40 of us to a very, very special lecture. where he and Steve Mayer were going to talk about learned helplessness. Now, Steve Mayer and Marty were roommates at Penn about 50 years ago, and they were doing a 50-year follow-up on learned helplessness.
Wow.
And that was the theory back in the 70s that revolutionized our treatment of depression. So people would, they learned from these series of studies that if you're in a chronically aversive condition, and you learn that no matter what you do, you can struggle, you can get angry, you can do it, no matter what you do, it doesn't change the situation.
Yeah.
When you're in that kind of a place, you will shut down and get depressed. Then if you go to a new situation where it's rather easy to negotiate and move through it, and you find out that, you don't have that motivation, even though it would be easy to get out of that new situation, you're not motivated. So they called it learned helplessness. And what they had found out, 50 years of research, they kind of fell on their own sword. And they started the class by saying, the lecture, by saying we were completely wrong.
Oh, wow.
And boy, you want to talk about getting everybody's attention. Here's the thing that changed the world, changed how we thought about depression. And here are two of the world's top researchers saying we got it wrong. And they said, what we've done is we found out that there's a loop in the brain between the dorsal raphe nucleus and the prefrontal cortex, where when you're exposed to something chronically aversive and difficult, your brain shuts down. Just like my computer or my phone will shut down if it overheats. Yep. It's automatic. You're not learning anything when you shut down.
Yep.
Your body's trying to conserve, your mind is trying to conserve energy because it says, don't waste it now. Wait until this passes, and then you'll have energy to spare. So what they were learning about their own research is that nothing was learned during that aversive condition. It was just an evolutionary shutoff by the body. And because of that, they started to look at, well, then really what makes the difference? What makes some people shut down and then turn back on, Yeah. And in the original study, about a third of the dogs that they were using, where they were exposed to these chronic like shocks that they couldn't get away from, when they were exposed to that, about a third of the dogs were able to shake it off. And now they understood why. Because it's not looking back and unlearning or relearning something. It's your capacity to look forward. Oh. It's risk assessment of the future. It's not unlearning something from the past. Well, I remember being in this lecture because the minute they said that, they said, so, and now we call this mechanism in the brain the hope circuit. Well, I wanted to run out of the classroom and start writing the book because it's not about unlearning something from the past. It explained everything to me because now when you can forecast your future differently, if you believe you have influence over the future events in your life, you're going to flourish. You're going to have hope. But if you believe you don't, then you're going to sink back in and stay stuck. So those are the three influences there.
Oh, amazing. Because honestly, like, I don't know, I can't help but connect things with myself and the experiences that I'm going through. Honestly, this whole crisis that we're in now and the lockdown and not lockdown and going out and the stresses of this new norm that we're all experiencing together for the first time, it's really challenging to sit and accept that you are in control. You know what I mean? Like, it's so easy to sit and look outside and say, oh, because of this, I can't do that. Or because of this, I'm feeling down. Or because of that. And what was really intriguing again about your book, and is something that's very fascinating to me, is that ability. It's just a matter of switching your brain.
It's a matter of switching perspective. It's
That's
just
it.
a change in perspective.
Absolutely.
That's what it comes down
Yeah,
to.
So
absolutely. It's not what happens to us, it's our response to what happens to us that matters. They've had studies after, lots of traumatic events. They started studying all the people who were exposed to exactly the same trauma. And what they found out is that about 25% of people will get post-traumatic stress disorder from it. About 50% will become resilient. It'll just take some people more time or not. But about the same number of people that get PTSD get something called PTG, post-traumatic growth. They see the traumatic event as an opportunity. As a chance to, I was at the World Trade Center. This happened to me. I don't want to be a financial consultant anymore. I want to travel the world, or I want to do this. So they see that exact same event with a very different perspective. So we've learned from people who have that ability, what I call the high hope people, how they view things, because that's the power. That's where we have something that we can learn from them and apply to us. That shift in perspective is the essential element in looking at our situation now. How do we change how we're looking at something to feel empowered?
Very interesting. What I find a lot of people, I think, including myself speaking, is that we sometimes confuse hope and faith as the same thing. The way I understood it is hope is something that you can control.
Yes.
Faith is something that's beyond your control.
True.
Yes.
Again, going back to perspective, I want to control I want to be hopeful of things that I can control, and just having the belief and faith and things will get better. It's easy to mix the two.
Yes, yeah. That's one of the things. There's actually three distinctions that I think are important. There's hope, there's faith, and there's optimism. I don't know if you've heard of there's a very famous church in New York City called St. Patrick's Cathedral.
Yes.
When I was doing the research for this, they invited me to come to the church to actually give a lecture in the church, which was really awesome, as the kids say, right? I mean, it was really something, but they wanted me to distinguish between hope and faith, and I threw optimism in as a bonus. But the difference is that with hope, it's your belief that you can control events in the future. Not even necessarily whether you can or not, but your belief that you can is where the activation of hope is. Whereas optimism is a much more, generic way of feeling good things will happen. So if I'm optimistic about this afternoon, it's just that I believe good things are going to happen. If I'm hopeful about this afternoon, I'm going to make good things happen. Right? Faith is a little different, because faith is that something else is going to make the good thing happen. And when I was at St. Patrick's, I told this story, and I'm not a big baseball person, but I loved Catfish Hunter, who was into the Hall of Fame, and I got a copy of an interview that he had done where he talked about everything. He's a pitcher, right? And everything he did in the off season and the work he did, holding the baseball, learning about the practicing in different weather conditions, and just everything he could do to become a better pitcher. But in this interview, he says, but at some point, I have to let go of that ball. And then I just have to have faith, because a gust of wind could do it. This could happen. I don't have control anymore. And I thought, what a beautiful way to talk about optimism, hope, and faith, because he could be optimistic that they're going to win the game,
Yeah.
right? The hope is that here's what he can do to make that happen. But at some point, he has to let go of that because there are other influences. And that, of course, leads into a more deeply spiritual question about where our role comes in and where faith picks up.
Yeah, and that's exactly like when you were saying that, and I'm just trying to kind of reflect internally with myself. I think that taking that responsibility is really the challenge, right? I think especially when we live at a time where people want instant results, instant satisfaction, instant feeling, and is it that easy? It's just a matter of me saying, okay, I'm going to turn the switch and be hopeful, or there is something I need to do. And I think, again, I know the answer, but I want it to come from you, and I want you to kind of bring it out. But I want people to understand that you have this power, and the but is you need to work on it. You need to do something about it.
Got to do something about it. Well, there's a phrase I use in the beginning of the book that is really what the Learned Hopefulness is all about. That hope is never further away than your next thought, because if you keep that notion front and center, it puts the responsibility for your thoughts directly on you. You are responsible for your thoughts. Every piece of research I've ever looked at here, every philosophical position, every spiritual position takes the same approach, right? And yet, it's probably the thing that most people don't fully, deeply grasp. You are responsible for your thoughts. And there's just no way to get around that. And a way to kind of understand that feature when it comes to hope and activation and taking responsibility is that if I asked you what you had for breakfast today, and you might not have known that I was going to ask that, and you might not have even been paying that much attention, but you could go back and think about that point in time, and you would see a recording of it. So it's sort of like there's a part of us that is always observing, always witnessing, noticing things, and even incidental things. It's kind of monitoring that. Well, that capacity, our capacity for self-reflection, is really what we're after. Because the moment you can notice something about your thoughts, the moment you can notice what you notice, you've taken a step back from the thoughts and recognizing that they are under your control.
Yeah.
They're it's like the wheels of a car. If I turn them to the right, the car goes to the right. If I turn them to the left, they go to the left. And if I put one in one direction and one in the other, I'm not going any place, right? But all of that is under my control. And that's the thing that is really empowering, because if you don't like the way you're thinking, you can change it. And I don't want to make it sound simple or easy, but it's a matter of continually giving yourself the opportunity to step back and witness what's going on. I've been reading a lot on the research on telomeres. Those are the ends of our chromosomes, and it's like the aglet at the end of a shoelace. They're the things that keep our chromosomes wrapped nice and tight, right? And the longer they are, it seems the better we are. They're really in every one of our cells, right? And if they're long and they're well wrapped, we tend to have much better physical health, mental health. Everything gets better. If they're shortened and they're frayed, there's all kinds of disastrous things, everything from inflammation to chronic diseases, and poor mental health, poor relationship. And it seems that they've been able to isolate the length of the telomeres as really a cause. It is so interesting, a cause for either our well-being or our disease. And as I'm reading about that, the people who do that research are struggling mightily to find out, well, what can affect the length of our telomeres? And what they find out is that it's our thoughts.
Wow.
Wow.
If we can take our thoughts and move them in a positive direction, our telomeres and the enzymes that help them grow will actually lengthen. And if we ruminate about negative thoughts, they'll deteriorate and shorten. So we now get into the cause of the cause, right? Which has to do with the emotional influence we have over our biochemistry. One of the things I do in the book, which you probably read, was I invite people to imagine a lemon in front of them,
Yes.
cutting it in half,
And then
smelling
salivate.
the lemon, and then biting into the lemon. Everybody I do that with, it produces saliva.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what negative thoughts do, only at a much deeper and bigger chemical level. If we can imagine a threat to us, it's as real as the threat itself. So we could be activating cortisol, adrenaline, all of these really powerful chemicals that will, over time, deteriorate our telomeres, which will deteriorate our physical health. So there's a lot of new research now going on about shifting our belief system so that we can move toward a challenge, be empowered by a challenge, so that we don't feel oppressed by it.
It's so amazing because it's the opposite end of the spectrum, or the opposite side of the coin to the placebo effect, which, you know, I just completed my master's. I bring it up all the time. I'm really proud. I just graduated.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Master of Health Policy from Imperial. But one of the things that I always found really interesting about a lot of randomized controlled trials, or any sort of trials that are done, is the placebo effect, right? Yeah. Which I think is the opposite side of that, the positive element of that, and how effective placebos are in treatment. And although, and you bring it up in the book, and it's so interesting that we focus on it as if it's the wrong or something not to consider, but it has such a massive impact. So, you know what I mean? With, like, there's all sorts of studies. There was a study that I came across from 2014 where 50% efficacy in relation to the actual medication. So we're not talking about a very small percentage. We're talking about half of the people that took the placebo actually cured their migraine. Yeah. It was with migraines at that time, that study. But it's just really interesting. And is that, from your end, the hopefulness, is that also the part of the expectation of the reward of being hopeful?
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought that up, because there's, the book is really all science-based, so there's a lot of application, but the applications aren't just a bunch of ideas that I think might work. We really grew it out of the evidence-based approach. So if we take three different perspectives on this, right, the concept of expectation, the concept of placebo, and then the concept of nocebo, which is the flip side. A nocebo would be the negative expectations that people have. If you've ever gotten a new medication or a new drug and you go take a look at the side effects on Google,
I feel a rash coming on.
That's right. I remember when I was when I was a student studying abnormal psychology, every chapter was another new psychiatric condition I had. Are you a little tired when you wake up in the morning? Oh my God, yes, I am. So in the expectation, I went all the way back to the 60s to look at the some interesting research in hypnosis, and then brought it all the way forward. So I'll just mention a couple of them here. One was a series of experiments where they put people in a hypnotic trance, and they were supposed to be taking a look at the effect of hypnosis on pain. And they told them they were going to touch them with a hot coal. And so they were hypnotized, they were put into a trance, and then they touched them with an ice cube, and they blistered up. That to me, when I first heard about that, I was like, oh my goodness, that tells you the power of our expectations.
Yeah.
Because we're so ready for something to happen, either positive or negative, that it's going to influence us. And if it's negative, look at what it can do. It can change our body's response to that. And now they've updated all of that. They have been able to show that people who definitely have allergies, if they're told that this is not the allergen during hypnosis, then they won't get the reaction, and vice versa. They're told that something that doesn't have that effect does, they'll get the reaction. And two other really quick studies with this. One was, and this is all in major journals. This isn't just, these are really important studies. They had a knee surgeon. I don't know if you remember that in the book, but this knee surgeon who, I don't know how they ever got permission to do this, but a pretty standard kind of knee surgery where I guess the ACL was torn or whatever. Yeah. And they came in, and what they did is they had the exact prep for it. During the surgery, they did not do the surgery. They only made the surgical cuts. So it looked like they did the surgery. And afterwards, they did all the rehab. And when it was all done, the surgeon's statement was that you could not tell this patient from the patient that had had the surgeries. This person fully recovered. And he said, it proved that my skill as a surgeon had no value in the recovery of this injury. Right. And so that tells you something, too, about expectation and setting. Right. And the last thing I'll say about this, because I thought it was kind of a cool thing when you start to think about it. But it's like the drug companies, the drug companies are up against the placebo effect every day. And for a drug to be valid, it has to beat the placebo effect. Yeah. And what they've been finding recently is that when the drug companies go to do this, and this is some real stuff now that they've been able to show, which is called a publication bias. Yes. Right. So they do 100 studies. And 98 of those studies show that they can't beat the placebo effect with this drug. But 2 studies do show it. Well, those 2 studies get published. Of course. And now you have something called a publication bias, because I'm a practitioner. I'll read those studies and I'll say, oh, look, the medicine worked. But 98% of the time, it didn't beat the placebo. So that's why a drug will come to market. And then they'll start to find out that, oh, wait a minute. It's not as good as we thought, or this or that. But that's something now that I think scientists will have to address, the publication bias.
Absolutely. That's a very big thing. And I think that as a part of my studies, that's essentially the skill that I've developed, right? So in that program, your main focus is to be able to decipher and read through journals, read through studies, and determine how strong those studies are, how correctly they've been done, and obviously how to avoid any sort of bias, whether it's funding, publication. There's all sorts of different factors in these things. But just to come as let's say, kind of like the last point with regards to this book, and maybe telling people how to get kicked off, what would you suggest as step 1? Obviously, actually, not step 2. Step 1 is read your book. We'll put it out there, guys.
That's the intervention itself. Exactly. Read the book and buy one for every one of your friends.
Exactly.
Exactly. Well, there's a couple of things. So let me try to frame this, because I think this is really important. The first thing, and I've just recently become the academic director of the Spirituality, Mind, Body Institute at Columbia. And
Congratulations.
so we do research. We have a master's program there, so we help people learn about how to use the best scientific information we have for spiritual well-being and spiritual growth. And one of the things that I do when I teach my course in positive psychology there is I try to help students recognize that whenever we talk about an intervention to help you or those you're working with, it's important to kind of think of timelines, that there are interventions that deal with the past, there are interventions that deal with the present, and there are interventions that deal with the future. So I'd like to respond to your question by saying that I think that there are very, very, very powerful ways to use that timeline to help people feel better right now. And the first way I would say is each morning when you wake up to take literally 2 or 3 minutes and do a gratitude review of the last 24 to 36 hours. Now, that's a past intervention. What I mean by that is that good things have already happened. They've taken place already. We're not trying to create something, look for something, fabricate something. They've already taken place. The difference is, because of something known as the negativity bias, we skip over our good things usually. But when we take the time to reflect on them, we're highlighting them, savoring them, and bringing them into the present. So if I were to think about yesterday, and I think about, well, what happened yesterday? Oh, I had a really good session with a client where there was a genuine shift in there, and that really made me feel good. Obviously, them feel, that's a gratitude. Well, it's already happened, and I might have moved on with my day and not really thought about it much. But in this harvesting process, we're going back and harvesting the positive emotions that are in our immediate past. So I think that kind of intervention helps people very readily, because we're not trying to create or fabricate something. Does that make sense, by the way?
Oh, absolutely.
Totally.
Yeah. Then the second thing I would say is much more about the immediate moment. And one of the things I discuss in the book is all the research on something known as dispositional mindfulness, which is basically you saying to you, catch yourself thinking. Notice what you notice, because every time you get a chance to see what your thoughts are, it gives you more influence over them. So just from time to time asking yourself, what am I thinking about now? How come I'm thinking about that? And there's even a technique to distance yourself from it a little bit, so that you can get a little, you start with that perspective thing. So I know it might sound strange, but on a regular basis, I'll say, I wonder why Dan is thinking that right now. So it gives me perspective from myself. You use the third person. And by the way, that is not like a little phony baloney thing. That's an actually very well researched technique of distancing, so that you start seeing you from the perspective of a higher self or a true self or something like that. It's still within the present moment. And I'm doing past, present, and future, right? So the past about gratitude, the present about this dispositional mindfulness. But the other thing in the present moment is kindness. There's almost no downside to kindness, unless you're overly kind, and as people are walking past you, you're trying to tie their shoes or something. That might be a little much. But kindness brings us into a whole new space in the moment. Because one of the things about kindness is, if I do something kind for you, I feel good, you feel good. But through a process known as elevation, anybody witnessing what I'm doing is going to feel just about as good as either being me or you. Now, that is really powerful, because it means if you spot an act of kindness and acknowledge it, or engage in an act of kindness, or even receive an act of kindness, that brings you into the moment in a different way. And then as far as a future intervention, I would strongly encourage people to engage in what I call micro goals. Micro goals means that, every person on the planet now has had their future altered by the pandemic, right? And it's
Absolutely.
been altered because whatever plan we had to, 6 months from now or 3 months from now has been radically altered.
Correct.
And because the information keeps shifting and there's so much uncertainty, we might not really be sure what we're doing 2 weeks from now or a week from now. So that means with micro goals, we recalibrate our goal to something in the next 20 minutes, the next hour.
Yeah.
When I knew I had to be here with you for this hour, this is all I'm doing right now. I'm not thinking about the 40 other things I got to do today or whatever. It's like, okay, this micro goal for this hour, I'm going to have a beginning, middle, and end. And what that does is gives us a level of engagement with the moment that directly activates us. See, hope is bi-directional. It's a two-way street.
Yeah.
If I change my expectation about what I can influence in the future, and then I act on that, the action on that gives me feedback that empowers me to do that again. So I can get it going from my belief system to the action, and then back from the action to strengthen the belief system. So that gives us a little something for the past, our gratitude, present gratitude, dispositional mindfulness and kindness, and then micro goals for the future.
Wow.
It's very. It resonates with me so well because it's very similar to the 5-minute journal book. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Yeah,
where
exactly.
it's the first thing you do when you wake up, put it next to your bed, and it's the same pages that you go through every single day.
Yeah.
First thing you write about is I'm grateful for, and you list 3 things that you're grateful for. Be it maybe the past, something you've done, you've achieved. You confirm your affirmations as well. So it's an amazing way to go by. I've actually stuck by it for at least I think 2-3 weeks. And I can honestly tell you it works. It really works.
And this has been my struggle, that going over and really just doing it. I have a very good friend of mine, a psychologist living in Kuwait, Ali, who's been begging me to start writing a journal. And it's not even about begging me. I know I should do it. It's just, those things you just.
But that's where I'm more curious is how do you maintain momentum? Life happens, work, family. Something that's so good, you're supposed to do it. It benefits you, but then we sidetrack. What tools or what techniques you can think of that will help somebody that knows what they're supposed to do, but it's just not getting to it?
Sure. Well, again, I'll defer back to these 3 things. You have to think about past, present, and future in terms of interventions, right? But then there's another layer that we know from educational psychology about how this stuff gets integrated and how it makes us whole, and how we can have a transition. So there's usually 3 layers of this, right? The first is what's called the cognitive layer. That's where you do all your shift in perception. That's where you learn how to pluck out your memories. That's all the stuff that has to do with your mind. Where am I going to focus? What am I going to focus on? I think it was William James who said, my experience is what I agree to attend to. And so the cognitive part of this is, what am I going to attend to? We have about 70,000 thoughts a day, and we can't pay the equal amount of attention to all of them. So you get to pick and choose. That's the cognitive part of it. And my encouragement, of course, is to pick the ones that fill you up the most, not activate a rumination and a downward spiral, but help us have an upward spiral. So the first thing would be the cognitive perspective and learning how to sort through your thoughts and pick the ones that are going to have the most positive juice for you. Then the second part of it is expressive. A lot of times when I do lectures and presentations and stuff like this, and I've had the good fortune of doing this around the world in other countries and stuff. It's always the same. I ask people in the beginning, do you have gratitude? And people go, oh yeah. Great. And so like, what kind of things you have gratitude for? Oh, everything. Yeah. Could you be a little bit more specific? And they're like, oh no, it's like overwhelmed. Okay. So now, if you look at the structure of the brain, right, the emotion, positive emotion. So we're in the limbic system, right, and so that is organized differently than our frontal lobes, right. So the minute you have to express an emotion, now it gets integrated. So the reason why I invite people to journal and write down is because the act of writing, no matter what it is, it doesn't matter if it's a Chinese or Arabic or English, because the form doesn't matter. What does matter, though, is that it's got a structural element to it. So now you take this big globby feeling, gratitude, and now you have to write down something specific. And as you're doing that, you're taking the expressive part of language to integrate the emotion. So the first part, the cognitive strategy, helps us decide what we're going to look on. The expressive part then becomes a way for us to start integrating it internally. And then the last part is interpersonal, sharing it with somebody. It's one thing for me to have an awareness. It's another thing for me to express that awareness in the form of writing. But the thing that really brings it out into the world is when I can share that with other people. So I make sure that I talk about things that have happened for me or for other people, things I've witnessed. I talk about that on presentations like this, or at lectures, or with my friends or family, to talk about this is the transition, because the minute you share it, now you've developed, in essence, a support network.
True.
So it moves from the internal to the external, and then that's what maintains it. That's what really buoys our positivity in an upward way.
Amazing. Thank you. I just want to, honestly, this was more than what I had anticipated for, just to your ability. You're very eloquent. You've expressed yourself extremely well through this conversation, and your book is just phenomenal. Like I said, I really wanted to dive into the American Snake Pit. This may be an excuse for us to ask you to join us another time in the future, because honestly,
my pleasure. Yeah.
I do not want to just go over the surface with that. There's just so much that I wanted to understand from you, from that experience, because I think it's just so riveting. And hopefully we'll give that some time. But again, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Dan. It was a real pleasure.
And thank you so much for your questions. It's clear that you've done your homework for this, and that just warms me up to no end, because that really allows me to riff on this a bit. Thanks for that opportunity.
Really appreciate it. Again, for the subscribers, please, tell your friends. For the people that haven't subscribed, subscribe. Like the video, share it, and please, we'll put all of Dr. Dan's details at the bottom. Please read his books. It's unbelievable. I think, it's a critical time. Really wanted to put something out there, and I think later we were talking about that. Really wanted to make an impact.
Absolutely.
And
that's why we're doing this.
These are the little things that we're doing, right? So I really hope everyone appreciates this and takes the time to really look at themselves and be hopeful. And there's always going to be better things across the way. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much, Dr. Dan.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Pleasure.